Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com, joined by Beavers Edge writer and KGO radio host TJ Mathewson. We're back with another edition of the Edge podcast, putting a bow tie on spring football as the Oregon State football team has officially wrapped up 2023 spring football practices, had their spring game this last weekend. TJ and I were there. We broke it down. I know you guys have seen our coverage and reactions. So we'll definitely be getting into the nitty gritty of that. We'll be talking the off season, some transfer portal. We'll be talking, biggest needs for the Beavers, position group battles, the whole 9 yards. So again, thanks for joining us here on this edition of the Edge podcast. TJ, what's going on, man? You about ready to get outside and enjoy what little sunshine we have left? It's going to be an awesome couple days coming up, man.
This has been the first day all year I've worn shorts, it's incredible that we had to wait until, April 26th to do it. But better late than never. And you know what? I'm going to get 2 more days of it this week, maybe 3 if you include Saturday as well. I'm looking forward to Friday. If you're going to come down here to Corvallis on Friday for the baseball game against Arizona, 7 o'clock first pitch, the weather is going to be unbelievable. It's going to be great. It's supposed to be a high of 84 down here on Friday.
Oh, it's going to be awesome. And like you said, we've been subjected to some pretty rough temperatures this winter. I feel like we've had a long winter, not so much just like snow all the time or anything like that, but just TJ, like the cold rain stuck. Like, this, you were in it for some fall camp, or rather spring camp practices. The cold rain persisted into April. I wasn't having it.
And that was only 2 weeks ago.
I know, right?
And now I'm back to wearing t-shirt and shorts, which I won't complain. It was summer weather. Hurry up.
Yeah, no, that's Oregon in the spring, right? A little bit of a roller coaster up and down for sure. But I'm definitely it's gonna be awesome and now that spring football is over for you mentioned getting down to some baseball games. I won't be able to get down to the Arizona series this weekend, TJ. I'm taking a little bit of a vacation now that spring football is wrapped up.
I get it. You're holding out for Western Carolina.
There's another series. We got, I think, is it
Utah and Western Carolina?
Yeah, Utah. I'll be at the Utah series for sure. And I think we got a couple non-conference games and still holding out. There's still a chance, TJ, they could figure their way into maybe regional hosts. So you never know. There's still a lot of baseball left to be played, but not a lot of baseball on this pod. Obviously, the Beavers dropped 2 of 3 to Arizona State over the weekend, got Grand Canyon on Monday, and then, as TJ mentioned, are back with Arizona this week. But we'll save baseball for the next podcast. We got plenty of spring football stuff to get into as, again, things are heating up. Obviously, Oregon State wrapped up spring football. It was, a pretty quick spring session, it seemed, but it was, just as long as normal. And now, we're seeing the reactions on the recruiting trail. And, I would highly encourage everyone to head on over to BeaversEdge.com. Our recruiting analyst, Dylan Callahan-Crowley, has been, awesome at getting reactions from across the board. And, TJ, you and I and several other media members were really impressed with, how the stadium looked, how the experience was on Saturday, how great the weather was. Everything we're hearing from the recruits that were there, which were a ton. And again, if you want those individual reactions, head to BeaversEdge.com. Some good stuff there. It sounds like things went off without a hitch this weekend. Some awesome reviews so far coming in from the kids in the recruiting trail.
And I was kind of impressed with the product they put on the field as well for the fans, which was refreshing. I was fully expecting to be bored. I'd never covered a spring game before. I was really just expecting 2-hand touch, but no, it was great. It was enjoyable, and it was good to see some groups really get to stand out, even if some of the more well-known players, Anthony Gould, Jake Levengood, etc., didn't get an opportunity to play. Still saw some pretty impressive performances. I can imagine why the recruits would be that impressed with what they saw on the field as well. It was a good performance, and especially if those guys are watching Aiden Childs. Man, oh man, that dude's awesome.
Yeah, there's I said we'll be getting him in the quarterback competition here momentarily, but like you said, it was never a boring moment, throughout the day, and that always can't be said about a spring game for sure. And Also got to give a shout out to some of the Beavers Edge subscribers that were there. Got to catch up with Hard Rock Fan and Go Beav 77. Shout out to you guys. It was fun to catch up, talk a little football. But yeah, I mean, the weather being fantastic, TJ, and more than anything, how about the attendance, right? That was
Yeah.
one of the more attended spring games, if not the most attended, that I've seen since I've been with covering the program since 2014. The buzz around Oregon State football is real, TJ, and based on the round of applause that DJ got when he went out there for quarterback, the round of applause that Aiden got, Oregon State fans are they're the expectations monster, TJ, is going to need to be fed a little bit now after this 10-win campaign. Beaver fans are expecting something this year.
I just don't know what everyone's going to do over the summer. Like, what are they going? What are they going to just be staring at the transfer portal? Well, again, we'll have a little bit of a conversation on some potential adds and some potential subtractions into the portal later on in this podcast. But from as far as I can tell, that's the only thing people are going to be able to do, because everything you saw out there at the spring game further confirmed that is the expectation of a 10-win season. You saw the talent in the quarterback room. You saw the defensive line play against kind of a banged up offensive line. They didn't play a great game, but the thing great teams do is they rush the passer extremely well. And that's exactly what the Beavers did. And Takari Hickel really, really stood out for that spring game. And you see all those things, and you see Joe Swen making plays in the secondary as well. You saw everything you wanted to see with that. So there was nothing there to suggest otherwise, unless you want to nitpick and said DJ didn't look great. Like, okay, it is still April, so there's not too much to really fret about with that. But just think, DJ's got a whole summer to build some more chemistry in this offense. He's got a whole fall camp as well. We're still yes, go win the job.
Yeah, no, and it's a good thing you mentioned that, because your assessment is spot on, right? I don't think DJ necessarily showed enough throughout spring to warrant running away with the competition, and that's why I think we're seeing and even some great discussions on the damn board on Beaver's Edge talking about is Childs really in this mix? And I think you and I have kind of looked at it from multiple angles, talked about the fact that maybe he ran more against, with the third team offense against the third team defense. How would he have looked potentially being more so in with the ones? As best I could tell, TJ, he never really ran much against that first team, defense throughout the entirety of spring. So a little bit of an incomplete sample size, I think, there. But for the most part, I still think, the situation remains largely the same. I think Childs offers tremendous long-term upside, as in a year ago, you maybe start him as an 18-year-old. And I sincerely believe that. He literally has, a chance, I think, to start, like if he's, class of, year prior, I think he's got a shot. But the fact that, DJ was as high profile as he was, and, the fact that, he transferred in and, all the expectations that come with it, I think it would just be, it would be surprising for him to not win that job in year one. And I think ultimately, once he gets a handle on the playbook and the offense, I think his physical skills and, ability are going to offer the highest upside at the position. With all that, I think the coaches fully know what they have with Ben Gulbranson. And I think he, certainly is, a known commodity. And there's something to be said about that, TJ. Ben is a guy who proved he could win games, right? Does it mean that they can win all the games? Probably not, but some games, sure. So I think there's a lot of angles to consider if you're Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren ultimately this summer,
Could Aiden Childs win you a football game right now?
Sure. I think so.
I think so too. Right. From everything we saw, like there's nothing to suggest otherwise. I mean, what if he's running with the first team line and first team receivers? I mean, sure, he's facing the first team defense, but there's nothing there that out of structure, which I mentioned a lot in my Nuggets report, because I think that's really where Aiden Childs was showcasing of how well he can ad-lib on a play. I mean, that dude has some escapability in his game, and the arm talent combined with that allows him to make plays the other two guys either don't try to make or just can't make.
Yeah.
So
He's got a little
just seeing that.
He's got a little Lamar Jackson escapability, doesn't he?
He does. He's quick. He is quick. The big difference between him and DJ as a runner, though, which has been detailed, is DJ is 250 pounds. Aiden Chiles is how much?
190?
What?
190?
Yeah.
I think.
And how well would an Aiden Chiles stand up right now if he got just clocked by a linebacker if he didn't go down and slide? That's
195.
That's the risk you run right there.
Yeah, 195.
That's the risk you run with that. Regardless, though, I think Aiden Chiles can win you a game right now, and that's what the coaching staff's going to think going into into August is, hey, we have 3 guys here who could win us games. Dead serious. This is a real competition. I mean, this is much different than what we saw last year. The amount of excitement going into this August, not only just surrounding this program, but I'm excited to watch this quarterback battle. It is going to be fascinating.
Oh yeah, no, it's gonna be very exciting, and like you said, for all those reasons, I think all 3 guys can win you games. All 3 guys have different degrees of upside. Like you said, I think the fact DJ's frame, I think, is going to be something that can definitely be an asset to Oregon State this year, especially from a mobility perspective, because he did that so well at Clemson this last year. And this is all to say that Brenden Slaughter, fully expect DJ to still win the quarterback competition when all is said and done. However, I think Aiden Chiles has a real chance to seize that backup job. And that's not a knock against Ben, TJ, as much as it is how impressive Aiden's been.
There are a lot of things that Aiden can do that Ben can't. I mean, it's just as simple as that. All the coaches can see it. Everyone who's sitting there watching Aiden Chiles play sees that he has a chance to, I mean, he could be arguably, is it a crazy thing to say that he could be the most talented quarterback they've had? Like, is that crazy to say?
Like, ever? Probably not ever. I mean, Derek Anderson, I think, was a top
Derek Anderson
10.
Run like that?
No, but Derek Anderson carved out a pretty good. He's, I believe.
I'm thinking along the lines of like
mobile.
I don't know if has there been like a combination of both of the arm and the legs.
You're gonna chuckle at me, but the 1962 Heisman Trophy winner, Terry Baker. I mean,
different. It's a very different game.
Different era.
A different game.
Different era, but like for the video footage that does exist of Terry Baker and those Oregon State fans who were lucky enough, my granddad and whatnot, and can remember just about everything from those years and whatnot. And again, just the idea of a Heisman Trophy coming to Corvallis is still something that is an enigma and just something that needs to get so much more publicity and love than it does. But Terry Baker, very dual threat guy, owns the Oregon State record for longest run from scrimmage, 99 yards, can only be tied, can never be broken. And he would, if we want to, just because Oregon State, maybe Tim Alexander in the early 90s, when Oregon State was running a wishbone offense, but I don't think he nearly had the passing upside that Chiles can offer. Terry Baker was really good at still passing the football, hence why he won the Heisman. But feel free for anyone to drop comments in this. But
yeah, please do. It's something to think about. We're a long way away from the conclusion of Aiden Chiles' career. Well, let's remember he's just 17, right?
But if you want to talk, but like you said, if you want to talk pure ranking coming out of high school, the only quarterback that I think would best him would be Derek Anderson. And I think that's because Derek Anderson was, under our U.S. Army, whatever it was, All-American, bowl, it was, Derek Anderson was like an enigma coming out of, Scappoose, Oregon, and all those things. But even still, it'd be close. So, yeah, I mean,
I said, Derek Anderson was not running like Aiden Chiles runs.
No. And, granted, he was a Pro Bowl quarterback for the Cleveland Browns, which is pretty hard to do, TJ. So just got to throw that out.
Okay.
Just got to
Yeah,
throw
you
that
know what?
Hey,
you know
hey,
what?
hey.
Well, I think the conversation ends right there, right at that moment.
Just saying. Hey, I got to give Derek his love, man. He had a solid little moment in the sun.
Where is he on that list of the Browns jersey with the number 2 on it and all the names on it? Where is he on that list?
Of all those dudes,
is he right in the middle? Is he right in the middle?
He's got to be. I mean, because you think about it, I'm pretty sure Baker Mayfield, the 1 year he took Cleveland to the playoffs, was a Pro Bowl quarterback. So it's since been eclipsed. But all the horrible quarterbacks that Cleveland ran through, none of them were as good as Derek Anderson. And it's Derek Anderson won 10 games. Baker Mayfield was the next quarterback to win 10 games, man. And, a lot of circumstances and reasons for that. But yeah, I mean, I think, if he follows the path of what his career is supposed to be, I think Aiden Childs' ceiling is immense. And I think, it's going to be, like you said, fall camp. It's going to be awesome to see.
If you think I'm crazy, my Twitter DMs are open. You can tell me I'm stupid. That's fine. That's totally okay. I'll accept
it. Again, thanks for joining us here on the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter, joined by KGO radio host and BeaversEdge.com writer TJ Mathewson. We're breaking down Oregon State spring football. Moving to the other side of the ball, TJ, because, I think, folks, there's not a lot to say when it comes to offense and specifically, we can make a mention on tight end, which I think is going to be in a great position come fall camp when Jack Belling's into a mix with Jermaine Terry, Riley Sharp, Jake Overman. I think there's a lot of depth and talent there. I think running back, you could throw a dart and pick out a guy. Yep, who's going to be a stud this year. So we all know what's going on there. Spring kind of showed us what we know. Receiver, we'll get into that a little bit later in the podcast as we talk transfer portal. But as TJ mentioned, top of the podcast, some good depth there. Silas Bolden, Anthony Gould, John Dunmore leading the way amongst some other guys. I think they feel confident as it stands right now. But switching over to the defensive side, TJ. You mentioned the defensive line. I wrote about it a little bit too over the weekend. Is it a stretch to say this is the best defensive line in the Jonathan Smith era? Because I wrote about it. I think it is going away. We talked to Isaac Hodgins. He thinks so.
Not a very high bar to clear to start. But
fair enough.
He said, Isaac Hodgins said for sure the deepest, which I'll agree with. I mean, again, they were rotating. I think I had 5 different guys with sacks during the spring game. I mean, and that's just with a very sped up game, right?
Sure.
So it's not a stretch. It's not a stretch at all. And when we see guys like Takari Hickle really light it up and do the things he did, it's not surprising. I was very impressed with the group. I'm trying to comb back over my notes and see who else really stood out, but it was an impressive performance, and that was the biggest question, of course, coming for this defensive line going into the spot right in the spring. What's the one thing they needed to do? They needed to pressure the quarterback more, and that's exactly what, and the live public showing, that's what they did. I mean, Hodgins himself got a sack alongside Takari Hickle. Nico Taylor got a sack, and then Olu Omatosho also got in there. And we saw a bunch of guys getting close to the quarterbacks and getting some TFLs as well and really collapsing the pocket. It was really impressive. It really was. And that group is only going to get deeper as the spring comes along and they get some more guys healthy over the summer.
Without a doubt. And, I think it's very on brand, TJ, that you are sitting right where you're sitting, because Oregon State has not had a defensive lineman record, I think it's more than 4 sacks in an individual season since number 95 right behind you, Scotty Crichton. Dylan Wynn, too, number 45 there to your left, or to your over your right shoulder, I should say. Those were the last 2 guys that were, I would say, absolutely effective at purely rushing the passer. I'm not going to say there weren't guys in between who weren't good at, being good defensive linemen. But, going back through, I wrote about this story in the offseason. it's been, a 2013 Scott Crichton had 8.5 sacks coming from a defensive line spot, right? Since then, yes, there has not been a defensive lineman, TJ, record more than 4.5 sacks in an individual season. You've had some by committee work, even like this last year, right? Not, bad defensive production by any means, but it wasn't coming from the defensive line. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
and this group has a chance. I don't know if there's like an individual guy right now we could point and say they're going to get more than 4 sacks. It's kind of hard to tell.
Sure.
But it is entirely possible.
I think James Rawls could be in that mix.
Yeah.
I think Isaac
I don't know
Hodgins,
if Andrew Chatfield. Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know if Chatfield is going to get enough snaps, or I don't know if he's that pure of a pass rusher.
Yeah,
to quite nail that.
Yeah, I think he would probably count more as an edge outside backer than like a true hand in the ground defensive lineman. But it's all subjective now, and definitely changes. But no, I think the other thing for Beaver fans that didn't necessarily get to watch the spring game that's of note, Isaac Hodgins looks like a different player this year. And I don't mean to say that like that he was bad last year, but he even said that when we talked to him earlier in spring was, last year was kind of shaking the cobwebs off a little bit, for lack of better terms, after having those injuries, getting back into the mix. And I think, he obviously had a decision to make this offseason, whether or not he wanted to come back. He chose to. And part of that, when he was talking to us, was just saying he wanted to have a full, where he felt like he was 100% throughout the year. He looked quick at the spring game. He's obviously got the leadership aspect dialed. And then the experience. I mean, he's been around for a minute. You can't deny that. I think he's another guy that's on my mix as a guy. And then last but not least, as a guy who I think's due for a big year, is Sione Lolohea. I really like the motor that guy plays with, TJ. He doesn't take a snap off.
We saw all those guys getting in the rotation as well. And what would be great for the Beavers, especially with the two you mentioned, Lolohea and Hodgins, they can get that interior pressure. We talk about edge pressure all the time, but I mean, you flip on any like Aaron Donald tape and watch him just wreck a game because he's pushing the quarterback backwards and he's pushing guys into the quarterback's lap. So we can't throw the ball. I mean, you're disrupting everything if you generate that interior pressure. And the good thing we saw from Hodgins in the spring game is he was like getting in the backfield from the interior, which would be just another level because, like the Beavers just struggle to generate pressure in general. But if not only you can get pressure off the edge in this upcoming fall, if you can get pressure in the middle too, that's something you might not. That's something like you don't even think about. And we didn't even mention like Kelsey Howard's name. He I don't know. He didn't really pop at the spring game. But I'm curious to see how he would do as sort of that bigger guy who could slide inside in a true say third down in a passing situation. You throw 280 pounds of him inside and let him rush the passer from that spot and see how he does.
Sure. And I think, there's also, Quincy Wright is another guy who, could be a big presence in there as well. And, got to mention Joe Golden as well. He had some moments throughout spring, but more than anything, TJ, I think it's just like the natural next step of progression that you like to see if you're Oregon State, because this last year, despite not getting after the quarterback a whole ton, we saw this defensive line group shut down opposing Pac-12 run games, right? And that just means you need to, like you said, you just want to take that pressure on the line and just push it back a little bit more. You know what I mean? And I think that's where depth, another year in Trent Bray's system, and so on and so forth, an influx of talent, a guy like Olu, as you talked about, coming in, Nico Taylor on the edge, so on and so forth. That might be enough just to push them over the top. I really do think there's going to be this, we mentioned it on a previous pod. I think it's reasonable to assume the secondary might be a little less effective than last year just based on new faces getting into the mix, but the defensive line should be more complete. So I think, in essence, if, we'll get to the linebackers in a minute, I think Oregon State still has a chance, TJ, to yield and field a defense that was pretty close to what they saw last year.
It will balance out. Like the defense, like a good defensive line, like you said, makes a secondary better. But as we're about to talk about the linebackers, I mean, you're losing Omar Spates. That also
Mm-hmm.
makes the linebacker group better too, because if the defensive linemen are up there getting those tackles, I mean, it doesn't matter who's behind you at the linebacker spot. If your first line of defense is taking care of most of the hard work on your defense, then everything behind it doesn't matter as
Exactly.
much. It doesn't matter where guys are because the defensive line will clean it up. They'll blow up a running back in the backfield. They'll interrupt a pass play and
Sure.
force the quarterback out of the pocket. They'll cause a quicker throw so a corner doesn't have to cover for as long. There's a whole number of factors of how important this improvement to the defensive line could be, and it's going to be something
Yeah.
we'll have to pay attention to as August comes around.
Certainly, and getting into the linebackers, obviously, I think, he didn't play this spring, but John McCartan, I think, is going to be in the mix for one of those edge rushing spots. We mentioned Drew Chatfield, Nico Taylor, Corey Stover. I think that'll, we even saw Matthias Malachi Donaldson get into the mix as well this spring. So I generally like where their talent is outside linebacker. Inside, as TJ mentioned, a little bit more of an unknown as we're going to be working in Easton Mascarenas, who obviously played really well in relief last year. I think he'll lock down one of the spots. And then the other inside linebacker spot's probably going to come down to the Utah transfer Mason Tufega and the pride of Tualatin, Oregon, John Miller, who played a really, really good spring. Full disclosure, being from, just the town next door, TJ, I'm selfishly rooting for John Miller heading into this next season, being a local kid, local guy. And throughout spring, he looked pretty good at that inside linebacker spot. I think Mason obviously offers some high upside, but he didn't play a whole lot at Utah. Transferred over, has, a couple years of eligibility left, obviously. But more than anything, I think John Miller is a true case of have a guy come into a program, pay your dues, and you're going to get your shot to play.
And I wouldn't count out Makai Tung either. I mean, he was getting some good run,
point.
and I would say he's fast enough for the part. I don't know if he's necessarily as big per se, if you want, but man, that dude, he tackles, he's flying to the ball. I mean, he still looked like he needed to work on his tackling a little bit, but otherwise, yeah, I mean, it's been him and John Miller getting most of the run because we haven't seen Easton for the good chunk of the second half of spring. So it was a lot of John Miller, Micaiah Tung at that linebacker role. So I'd be curious to see among that group who's really going to step up and take that spot. There's some big shoes to fill there in the middle. That linebacker group was awesome last year. So the expectation's pretty high.
Interesting, we never mentioned this on the pod before, but I think it's worthwhile to mention. Little like father, like son, TJ. Yeah. Reggie Tung comes into Corvallis, obviously, I believe was recruited to play running back and then, ended up defensive back and I think safety before, he went off to his, NFL career. So you never know, right? Maybe the Tung family here in Corvallis, they're just meant to be on the defensive side of the ball. Yeah.
That's what he said. He said, like, now he can, like, when we talk to him after practice, he can finally send his dad some tape and get some evaluation
some
on how he's playing on defense. He'll go over he's got a little bit more insight on what looks schematically correct and all that, sure. And if he made the right read on a play and such. And he says he really does like playing defense. He says he enjoyed scoring touchdowns and playing receiver, but in the end, I mean, he just wasn't getting the run that he wanted to, and he thought, hey, sure. I could make this move to linebacker, and I think he's going to play some critical spots this year. It's not like the dude doesn't already make an impact on special teams. He could be in there really blowing up some guys. Just a question if all the other aspects of the linebacker position will really sort of absorb it into his skin for this first season of him going.
Certainly. And yeah, like I said, it'll be interesting to see if he offers, some upside there, some different play for certain, because, it's obviously he's a very talented athlete that I think can definitely do a lot of things. So we keep an eye on him for sure. Last but not least, let's wrap up in the back end and the secondary, TJ. Obviously, big shoes to fill as, Alex Austin, Rajon Wright, and Jaden Grant leave behind quite the legacy. But based on what we saw, you got Jaden Robinson back, you got Ryan Cooper back. You've got a couple other dudes who have been there, have some experience. Alton Julian will be due back in the fall, obviously, as he gets ready from his injury. You got Katano Ladapo there in the way back end playing safety. You mentioned Joe Swen. I've liked him and Trice Ivy early on too. Ian Massey was a guy who also caught my eye throughout spring. I really do think they're going to be okay, TJ. Like at first, I was, pretty, I had a high level of concern losing as much experience as they did, especially, Alex Austin, who caught me by a bit of a surprise, declaring early. The other two guys I kind of expected, but Austin, I was a bit surprised, leaving. But overall, I think the depth is pretty solid, and I think they'll be in a good spot.
Even with Skylar Thomas now out for the season, he got hurt, I think, the last week of spring, which is really unfortunate because he looked like he was going to get a really good chunk of playing time, I think, as a safety. And he was playing pretty well during the spring from when I saw him. So that's really unfortunate for them. But otherwise, that's the group where they're like, too deep. Like we saw at times last year where Rajon and Alex would come out and they'd put some of the younger guys in and there wouldn't be any drop off at all. And they'd play really well. And those corners were really harassing the quarterbacks in the spring game. I mean, Joe Swen picked off 2 passes. He picked off DJ once, picked off Don Montiel the other time. And those other guys, I mean, they're sticking to these receivers. They're really doing their job. And, when it comes to a corner, a coach can have a certain mold and have his guys want to play a certain system, and it works out pretty well. And for some of these guys, I mean, Joe Swen's, he's a tall, lanky guy. And it really works out for him that he's just kind of sliding into that spot that Rajon had, who another tall, lanky guy, and he's done pretty well. I mean, we'll have to see when he, goes up against maybe some Anthony Gould when spring rolls around, when fall rolls around, and get some true one-on-one play. But man, he was good. He was really good. It was a good showing for him and for the rest of the secondary.
Certainly. And, it's something else I alluded to. I said, I think the duo of Blue Adams and Anthony Perkins, it's a little unconventional to have 2 coaches coaching the defensive backs. I think that's kind of one of the best kept secrets in the conference because they found some secret sauce this last year. And I think that's going to certainly help Oregon State in the back end, moving forward. And we're obviously not done talking spring and breaking it down. There's still plenty to discuss and talk about. TJ and I didn't get a chance to necessarily dive into the transfer portal as much as we wanted to either, but we're doing that on the next edition of the pod, potentially next week as well, as I return from my little vacation as well, because TJ, they're looking at guys in the portal. It's an exciting time. We're definitely going to be excited to bring you guys more podcasts. So again, big thanks to TJ Mathewson for joining me as always on this edition of the pod. We'll be back soon with another edition of the Edge podcast, looking at the offseason, the transfer portal, Oregon State baseball, and much more.